Thank you, Jen, for sharing those words. Those words come from three of our over 2,000 incarcerated Unitarian Universalist members of the Church of the Larger Fellowship, the congregation that I serve. Three of the over 2,000 people who express to us on a regular basis how glad they are to have found a faith that insists that they are worthy of love, no matter what it is that they have done in their lives, that insists that they have inherent worth and dignity, no matter how they are treated by the rest of society or what their identities are. And I feel it's important to bring the words of our incarcerated members into worship because it is those incarcerated members that call me to preach today what I'm about to share with you. Today, friends, I am going to ask you to activate your imaginations. The imaginations that are necessary to begin building a new way. The imaginations that must be able to envision the world we want to create. In order to get to that world that we want to build, we have to figure out what world we're building. I'm going to ask you today to imagine big, beloveds. I want you for just a few moments to put away any resistance that comes with knowing that the work of making the imagination we are about to do real, that work will be daunting. I'm going to insist that it is possible, beloveds. It is possible to do that daunting work because we know that someone imagined the world we have now, and they made it so, and they were wrong. And so we need to imagine a new way together. Today, I want you, along with me, to imagine a society without prisons. Now, what I don't want us to think about is simply a society exactly like the one we live in now, but with no prisons. We understand that it wouldn't work to do it exactly that way. So instead, I want us to dream together about what our society would be like if we did not need prisons anymore. Abolitionist thought leader Mariam Kaba writes, "The prison industrial complex abolition is a vision of a restructured society in a world where we have everything we need: food, shelter, education, health, art, beauty, clean water, and more things that are foundational to personal and community safety." Today, beloveds, we are going to imagine together a society in which no person is disposable, in which no person is ever given up on, in which every person, as a matter of their inherent dignity and worthiness, has everything that they need, not only to survive, but also to thrive. You notice that Mariam Kaba's list was not just food and shelter, but art and beauty. We need to create a world where everyone can thrive. Today, I want you to imagine our world transformed by people who insist on centering love in their every action. And so in order to make this world happen, in order to build this world that I'm asking you to dream about, in order to make prison abolition, which is something that I am called to do, work, in order to make it possible, there are a few things that we will have to do, and none of them are small. I'm going to touch on three of them today. We will need to understand and eliminate the root causes of crime. We will need to examine and change our public philosophies of harm, crime, and justice. And this third one is important for us as Unitarian Universalists, as liberal people of faith. We will need to change our society's public theology of sin and punishment. Because the public theology currently at work in United States society is fundamentally flawed. And it is at the center of so much of the change that we want to make together. So first, beloveds, we need to understand the root causes of crime and work accountably in relationship, building coalitions in our communities and our states and our nation to transform our society to eliminate as many of them as is possible. It's a lot of work. I've said it before, I'll say it again, it'll be a lot of work. But what are the root causes of crime? Now we know, study after study after study has shown again and again that most of the crime in our midst comes from economics, from lack of the availability of those things that people need to survive and to thrive. Research by many sociologists all across the world have shown this again and again and again. So what would it take to build a society in which nobody felt that they had to resort to criminal activity in order to pay their rent, in order to buy the things that they need in this world, in order to help their children eat, in order to have some measure of beauty or luxury even in their lives, because everyone deserves some measure of beauty and luxury in their lives? What would it mean to create a society where everyone had access to what they needed to thrive? It'll take a lot of work, but I want us to imagine it together. I want us to imagine what it would mean to have a society in which people with addiction and mental health issues had abundant, available treatment options for them, that they did not have to go into bankruptcy to afford. That we had a society that accepted those abundant, available treatment options as necessary for the health and well-being of people, rather than making them judgmental things that people didn't want to do out of fear of being outcast further in society. We know that addiction and mental health issues are another major source of crime, and we don't treat them properly in this country. We don't make them abundant and available and free to people. We need to do the work to understand why it is that people engage in criminal activities, why it is that people do harm to other people, and we need to start changing it. Now, this is related to the second thing that we must do, which is to change our public philosophy of how to identify and respond to harm. We need to make a clear distinction as a society between what is actually harmful and what is not. Let us all be clear that not everything that we have labeled a crime is harmful, and some of the things that are harmful, that are clearly harmful in our society, are not things that we label criminal. I'll give you some examples. Wage theft. Wage theft is clearly harmful. It is clearly predatory behavior. It is clearly harming those who are the most vulnerable people in our society, and it is considered a civil offense in our society. People do not go to prison for stealing the wages of their lowest income workers. People do not go to prison. They lose their jobs, maybe, they get sued, maybe, but they do not go to prison for that because we do not label it criminal, even though it is actively harming people in every community. If you haven't actually been the victim of that yourself, you know someone who has. That is how pervasive it is in our society. And yet it's not a crime. Marijuana possession. In so many places, marijuana possession is still considered criminal, even though the recreational use of marijuana by a single individual is not harmful to the community around them, not harmful to them any more than the recreational use of tobacco is. And yet, people get locked up for it in communities all over the country. It is labeled criminal by our federal government, and while states are beginning to come around to this, states are beginning to decriminalize that particular thing, and I heartily applaud that. It is still one of the things that is least harmful in our society that we actively make criminal in so many places. And the people who get locked up for it are disproportionately Black and brown and poor people, right? Even though rich and middle class and white people use cannabis at the same or even greater rates than Black and brown and poor people, who gets locked up for that criminal thing is disparate. So it's important to look at the underlying inequities at work that have fed this system. It's important to understand that we put a lot of resources into an increasingly militarized police force in this country. And I think that we need to imagine those resources going to nonviolent options in our society. The leading mayoral candidate in the city in which I call home, New York City, has proposed a mental health force in our nation's largest city, so that trained mental health workers, social workers, addiction workers can respond to people who need help, who are in crisis, rather than police responding with guns. It's controversial. It is unbelievably controversial that someone would even propose this in New York City. It needs to be non-controversial, my friends. Can we imagine restorative justice processes, training people in restorative justice processes and putting them to work in our society, processes that ask people, rather than locking them away and punishing them, to ask them to engage in the work of relationship building, of reparation, of making amends for the harmful things that they've done. What might that look like in our society? What might it look like in our schools? Our schools that function as school-to-prison pipelines all over the nation, where children who have done things that are harmful in schools are suspended again and again, removed from their educational opportunities, removed from the healthiest thing in their life, again and again for longer and longer periods of time, and ultimately expelled from school, rather than asked to engage in restorative justice practices, of making what they have done right, of learning how to be better people. What might it look like if every school, rather than engaging in that suspension to expulsion to prison pipeline, embedded restorative justice practices in their work? What could it look like in our society, rather than just immediately leaping to, you have caused this harm and therefore we need to lock you in this cage? How might we make that better? And of course, every time I talk anywhere about abolition, someone brings up cases of people having actually done heinous, heinous things for reasons that we cannot discern or root out of our society. And people wonder how abolition works if we can't stop those heinous things from happening. And so, yes, in case you were worried I wasn't going to get there, there are some people who do heinous things. There are some people in our midst who are sociopaths. Not as many as you have been led to believe, not as many as you have been led to fear, but certainly there are some people who need to be separated from the rest of society for their own good and for the good of our society. And so let's imagine together how we might do that effectively but humanely. Instead of creating cages to lock people in and putting them away and isolating them from connections with the rest of society, instead of putting in their way increasingly onerous restrictions on visitation and mail, how about we design a system that separates them and still understands that they're human, still understands that they have worth and dignity as people? Which leads us to our third thing. And again, this is the big one for religious people. There is a public theology at work, a theology that is hundreds, if not thousands of years old, that says that when someone does something that is outside the bounds of society's rules, they become less than. They become disposable. As liberal religious people, we need to start talking about this as a theology at work in our society. It's a theology rooted in theologies of original sin, of the inherent depravity of humanity. Our Puritan ancestors, our spiritual ancestors, insisted that people were inherently evil and that it was our spiritual journey in life to fight against the evil that seethes at the core of humanity. Our Unitarian ancestors pushed back against that. Our Unitarian ancestors said, maybe there's a goodness in the center of each of us. Maybe there is a spark of the divine in the center of us, and maybe our spiritual journey is to unleash that goodness, to let that spark of the divinity shine into the world. That is our religious birthright as Unitarian Universalists, countering this notion that people are depraved and evil. And because of the theology that's at work in our society, we attach irreversible labels to people. Criminal, felon, convict. These labels are not just descriptors, they are indications that someone's worth has been diminished in the eyes of our society. They are deserving of contempt, deserving of a lesser status, deserving of difficulties supporting themselves and their families, deserving of punishment and cruelty. Somewhere along the line, in enacting this toxic theology, we became a society addicted to punishment. And so our prison system in the United States, its first job is to isolate and dehumanize people in order to punish them. This does not work, my friends. It does not help people become better. It does not actually reduce criminality and harm in our midst. It does not work. But what we have done is that we have labeled some people as disposable. This is unacceptable. We've labeled people in our public documents as well. When the United States abolished chattel slavery in the 19th century, in the 13th Amendment to the US Constitution, we put an out clause in the Constitution that legally allows people to be enslaved, quote, as punishment for a crime. Those who are incarcerated in our midst are the last legally enslaved people in the United States. We did not finish the job of the abolition of slavery, and it is time to do that. And so we have to imagine how it might change. The good people of the state of California imagined it, or tried to, last year. They tried and they failed in their imagination. A ballot initiative made it to the ballot in California last year to ban enslavement in the state, which would really mean to ban slavery in prisons in California. And my friends, it failed. It failed because people have embraced this toxic theology. People have embraced this toxic theology that people deserve to be punished, even by enslavement. Instead, we need to insist that they deserve to be treated as human beings. They deserve to be brought back into relationship. They deserve to be brought into practices and systems that ask them to transform themselves and their communities after what they have been accused of doing. The people of California who successfully imagined not allowing animals to sit in cages, failed in their imagination of not allowing people to suffer in cages as well. This public theology does not help our society make better people. And so we have to change the theology that is guiding our society. As Unitarian Universalists, it turns out we know a better theology is possible. We know inherent in our values, inherent in our covenants, inherent in our principles, that no one is disposable. We know that every person has inherent dignity and worthiness. And so we get to start the imagination. We get to start the imagination of a system that begins with relationship and insists on relationship, even when those relationships have been broken. That is the theology that we must make manifest in our society. It has been our theology, our Unitarian theology, our Universalist theology, our Unitarian Universalist theology for a very long time. And it is time that that theology leaves the sheltered walls of our congregations and makes its way into the streets. This new public theology must be pervasive. It must start in the home. It must be enacted in the schools. Think about parenting, my friends. How do we parent in ways that are about relationship, about honoring goodness, about making people better? Transformative justice using restorative practices based on asking people to take accountability to their actions are theological approaches. They are relational approaches. And I want you to imagine them with me. Can you imagine this with me? Can you imagine this radical transformation of our society? Instead of just a kinder, gentler prison industrial policing system, something radically different in which that harmful, violent system is no longer necessary. Can you imagine digging deep to excavate the racist roots of our current system rather than just settling for racism light? I think you can. I think we can. I think we have the relationships in our community to support us in doing that. And if we can imagine it, we can start to create it. May it be so. Blessed be.